So when you ask anyone from outside India, from abroad, he would definitely, I mean, if he's a scholar, he would definitely say that the first name which he or she heard regarding Indian freedom struggle was, of course, the name of Lokmanya Tilak. And that kind of leadership actually was not something which was gifted to him. There was no, so to say, promoter, no godfather to bring Tilak forth to the opinion of public as such. It was self-made. I mean, incidentally, we are now thinking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliance, self-independence. But I must say that Lokmanya Tilak himself stands as the symbol for this, for self-reliance. He was self-made. I mean, I don't want to compare other leaders with him, but if you, for example, consider Gopal Krishna Gokhale, now it was Ranade himself, Justice Ranade himself, who stood behind Gokhale sir, so that his leadership would grow, etc., would groom, and so on and so forth. But so far as Tilak is concerned, there was nobody. He had to find his own way, and he had to show nation the way which he has himself found. And therefore, Tilak, the first kind of national leader, this thing I must say. It would be, now if we just take a kind of glimpse, we have a kind of glimpse before what happened before Tilak. We will find that in 1857 there was a great upsurge. The army of Britishers revolted. But of course, Britishers, as they were, very strong and shrewd, of course, they could manage to, suppress that upsurge. After that, the Indian people went into a kind of complex that this is the very strong or strongest power in the world, and which it is really difficult, if not impossible, to resist. In addition to that, what Britishers did, they had brought a particular act which prohibited the use of weapons. They confiscated weapons from the common people. So common people were all disarmed. So there was no possibility of revolt from amongst the common people. So far as the army was concerned, they restructured the army. And therefore, it was really impossible to do something against this power. And more importantly, perhaps, the newly educated people, you can call them elites, they started perceiving the British Raj as a kind of boon, so to say, kind of divine grace, divine providence. So far as India is concerned, because they perceived India as a kind of, nation which has to be taught something, which has to be reformed, and as it were, the Britishers were the angels sent by the God himself. Of course, they were aware of the kind of exploitation which Britishers were, engaged in. But they thought that the loot which Britishers were making of India was a kind of price which we have to pay. So there is nothing wrong in it. This is simply give and take. Because, but for English, we wouldn't have gone forward as we did at that time. So that was the perception of educated people. Now, on this background, if you find that in 1885, Indian National Congress was founded, of which Tilak was one of the members, definitely. Now, the point is that the leadership of the Congress was in the hands of the elites, which later on used to be called moderates. So most of them had very good relation with government officers. They were highly respected in people and in the government. They had some, titles like Rao Sahib, Rao Bahadur, Khan Bahadur, and even Sir. So it was definitely unnatural to expect on their part that they could do some kind of, extreme action against the British government. So what was the way they followed? they followed the way of, coming together in sessions, holding some meetings in their own drawing rooms, making some petitions, then to visit the British officers as delegations. These were the ways and means which they exploited. But the Britishers were not the people to respond such ways positively or to our expectation. So the credit goes to Lokmanya Tilak, who pursued the real nature of this kind of imperialism. Imperialism coupled with capitalism. Rather, one can say that the spread of empire was really speaking necessitated by their economic growth, industrial evolution which took place in Europe. And so basically the point of Tilak was these people are exploiters. I mean, whatever good they have done, they did do something good. I mean, that cannot be neglected or denied. But whatever they did was simply a kind of byproduct of the things which they were doing for themselves. So they were very much interested in, safeguarding their national interests, etc., etc. And so we need not rely on them, however gentlemen they may be in ordinary life. So politics is a different kind of thing. So this was first recognized by Lokmanya Tilak, and then he went forward with his own policy that this kind of moderate response to the British Raj is not proper, it will not be fruitful. There was another kind of response, of course. There were some revolutionaries. In Marathi, I call them Ati Jahal, ultra extremists, you can say. So they were firm believers in a kind of revolutionary way, making use of violence, weapons, etc., etc. But Tilak was a very practical person, realist person. He could see, he had great respect for these people. In fact, he used to help them also. But when you come to the larger public, a public with Raj, we can definitely see that not all people could have such kind of daring, courage. And most importantly, perhaps, or more importantly, perhaps, they didn't have the weapons. You know, the pistol with which this gentleman ran, not ran, Jackson was shot by Kanere. This whole lot was sent by Savarkar to India. So we didn't have those kinds of weapons even. So in this situation, on the one way he found that the ways and means of the moderates, they are not working. On the other revolutionary kind of avenue was becoming impracticable. Now therefore Tilak went for another important weapon. What was that weapon? And I may say that Tilak, there was a kind of paradigm shift in the politics of India, in national freedom, which our people were struggling for. Now what was that way? The way was, first of all, he brought the politics out from the drawing rooms of the elites outside. Masses. So masses was the strength of Lokmanya Tilak. And therefore sometimes he was criticized ironically as Telia Tambolanche Pudari. That is leader of masses. But interestingly enough, Lokmanya Tilak was a firm believer in the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Now he explored and exploited that concept that had been there all along the centuries, one can say. From Shankaracharya at least, because we have the commentary of Shankaracharya, the most ancient commentary on Bhagavad Gita. The word is there. What was that word? Lokasangraha. In Bhagavad Gita, the 4th chapter. But perhaps, except perhaps Naneshwar, nobody could take that concept seriously. So Tilak was the first scholar who took the concept of Lokasangraha and Loka. So what are we to do? For whom? For people, for the masses. And this leadership of moderates was not in favor of the politics of masses. So Tilak then went for a kind of what is called Lokasangraha. And therefore you will find, as I pointed out earlier, that people from across the religious sects, creeds, and languages, and provisions, etc., etc., they were all, I mean, they followed Tilak. So Lokmanya Tilak was the mightiest leader at that time. Another important thing which I would like to point out to you is that he first introduced in politics the term Bahujan. People really do not know what is the origin of that in politics. It was in fact Lord Buddha himself who used that term. I mean, while he was addressing to his disciples. But in modern times, it was Lokmanya Tilak who used in political, I mean, life, the term Bahujan, and he said that the politics should be Bahujan centered. It is the Bahujan for which we are doing something. And may I point out to you that one of the Tilak's followers, so far as political action is concerned, was Maharshi Vitthalramji Shinde in Maharashtra. And Maharshi Vitthalramji Shinde went for founding the party called as Bahujan Party. So Bahujan Party, Bahujan Paksha was something which was founded by Vitthalramji Shinde as early as in 1920, after Tilak's demise. So one of the inspirations of Vitthalramji Shinde, so far as political activity is concerned, was Tilak, and so far as social activity is concerned, it was Phule. And of course Ranade, that cannot be denied. But the point is that this is how Tilak could say that, well, this is the center of the politics and this is the center of freedom struggle in India. Now, one more important thing which again I would like to point out to you, such kinds of activity on part of Tilak were not appreciated by the moderate group. Tilak, along with his followers, they were, all of them, they were expelled from Congress, 1907. And then, I mean, naturally, as you know, Tilak was imprisoned, I mean, sentenced for 6 years, and he went to Mandale, and there he had his great philosophical treatise written, that is the Gita Rasya, which also contained his own philosophy of politics. So once someone asked Lokmanya Tilak, what was his political philosophy? He said that my political philosophy is also there in Gita Rasya. You need not go to the files of Kesari, etc. That is the point. So the most important thing is that Tilak was not simply a politician. He did know the tactics of politics, and he did play also. Tilak was not simply a diplomat like Henry Kissinger. Tilak was also a philosopher. So, you know, Plato had already put the concept of philosopher king, as you know. Of course, Tilak didn't have any occasion to become king or minister or chief minister at that time, because we were, of course, not free at that time. We were not independent. But if Plato had this concept of philosopher opposition, then I would venture to say that Plato must have referred to the name of Lokmanya Tilak, had he been there at that time, of course, with that proviso. But that is what Tilak wanted to do. And he then, you see, he was always experimenting. He was always experimenting. He was always in people. He was in constant dialogue with common people. You know, anyone can approach him at any time, even if at midnight. And he used to help them. Even when he was in Andaman, in Mandale, a shepherd wrote a letter to him. So the shepherd wanted a kind of legal advice. There was some land dispute in his home. So Tilak responded him. And he even informed the Kesari office that you please check whether whatever I have written, because I don't have the books, the required books for that purpose. So please check and send to that shepherd by way of legal advice. So therefore, a common man was his concern. I must mention one important thing here. There was Mr. Walchand Ramchand Kothari, who was one of the journalists and leaders of Maharashtra. He began his career as early as in 1917. He ran the paper, weekly called Jagruk in Pune. And at that time, he was in opposition to Tilak. So when Gita Rasya came out, it was the young Kothari who went to Tilak and quarreled him on philosophy of Gita Rasya. So he disagreed. And Tilak, of course, entertained him, almost a boy of 20 years, you can say. Then he joined Brahmaneswar movement. Fine. But there was a time when he rethought, and interestingly enough, he wrote a book as the short version of Gita Rasya, essentials of Gita Rasya, because Gita Rasya really, it is a big book and it is not possible to understand for anybody and everybody. So as a kind of pragmatic guide. And then there he said that, well, I was definitely in opposition, but now I feel, this is important, that if there is a democrat in India, it is Tilak. And if Tilak is not democrat, then there is no democrat in India. So this kind of Loka Sangraha, this is a kind of, people say that there is a way which is called devotion. Devotion, path of devotion, the path of what is called karma, action, and the path of knowledge. Now Tilak was firm believer in karma siddhanta, karma doctrine, Nishkam Karma Yoga. But that Nishkam Karma Yoga requires knowledge. Yeah, it is not something which is opposite, something which is contrary to knowledge. And then, perhaps more importantly, after you become enlightened, that is jnani, and for that purpose eligible for moksha, you have to continue to do work, but now not for yourself but for others. So Tilak was karma yogi, an enlightened karma yogi in this sense. And one more addition to this, that he did his karma for people, okay, by way of service, by way of devotion to people. So people as such was God, Upasya for Lokmanya Tilak. And therefore, this year, which was the death centenary year of Lokmanya Tilak, definitely we wanted to celebrate it in on grand scale, but because of this COVID-19, it is not possible. And therefore, we are doing this, and fine, I must thank the society, etc., etc. And one more important thing with this we will continue. I will conclude my lecture. That thing is that, see, I said that Tilak's contribution to Indian freedom struggle was seminal. Now he then ran this movement to such a stage where it became possible for Mahatma Gandhi to lead it further. But for Tilak, Gandhiji's activity would have been impossible. This is important thing. Gandhi, after all, was standing on the shoulder of Tilak. So there was the age on the name of Tilak, and then historians talk the age of Gandhi. And I will end with my share regarding these two ages and regarding these two leaders. Look at the freedom struggle is like a kind of ghazal, suppose. Then what is the structure? The structure is this: matla hai gar tilak, ghazal-e azadi ka. Matla hai gar tilak, ghazal-e azadi ka, yakinan makta hai Mahatma. Matla hai gar tilak, ghazal-e azadi ka, yakinan makta hai Mahatma. कादिर अंदाज थे वे भी जिन्होंने काफिया दुश्मन का दरमियान. Thank you very much.
It's back and over to Delhi.
That was Sadanand More ji with his very, very inspiring talk, along with Shri Adesh Gokhale ji from Pune. Thank you very much for joining us. We shall now take you to Myanmar, where our director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center of ICCR in the Embassy of India, Yangon, Dr. Asawari Bapat, is waiting to introduce the next speaker to us. Dr. Bapat is a Sanskrit scholar having close to 25 years of teaching experience. Thank you, Dr. Bapat, for joining us. Over to you.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Bapat, a very warm welcome to you. Please take the session forward.
I must say namaskar to you all. I'm audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. It is my privilege to give a brief introduction of a famous writer, journalist, Mr. Momo Wu. He is graduated from Yangon University and attended journalism degree from Australia and Israel. He received special training of journalism from Thailand and India Mass Communication Center, India. Under the pseudonym Hin La, he has written more than 3,000 articles and 192 books. In this extensive list of 192 books, 12 are from India. These books include biographies of Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose, Swami Vivekananda, APJ Kalam, Narendra Modi, Lokmanya Tilak. Out of these 12 books, The Story of My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi and Builder of Modern India, Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak by N.G. Joe are the translations into Myanmar language. He is a recipient of literary awards. It includes National Literary Award, which is the highest literary award from literature in Myanmar. He is a Central Executive Committee member of Myanmar Writers Association and Vice Chairman of Myanmar Translation Network. Yesterday, his article, 100 Years of Death Anniversary of Lokmanya Tilak, was published in Standard Time, Delhi newspaper. Today, he is going to give a brief biography of Lokmanya Tilak. I request Mr. Mong Wu to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Namaste to you all. It's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to present the brief biography of Lokmanya Tilak on the occasion of the centenary of his death. There have been few men in history who have, through personal character and example, been able to deeply and profoundly to influence the thought of their generations as Lokmanya Tilak did. First of all, the most interesting thing about him for me is he was born in Ratnagiri, the west coast of India. I've heard the name Ratnagiri since my childhood days, that it was a place where last king, King Tibor from Mandalay, was deported by the British colonialists after his defeat in the War of 1885. He had lived there all the rest of his life and died there. 23 years later, Ratnagiri Bogada Tilak was born on 23rd July 1856 in Ratnagiri. Ratnagiri means a mountain of jewels. Ratnagiri have given birth a number of eminent sons in the last 300 years. Among them, none else in modern times was greater and more precious jewel than Tilak. Tilak's father was a schoolmaster who rose to become an inspector of primary schools. Tilak imbibed the love of Sanskrit and mathematics from his father, who passed away when he was 16. His mother having died 6 years earlier. In keeping with the practice of those days, Tilak was married at 16, a few months before his father's death, to Tapi of the Bal family in a neighboring village. His father transferred to Pune when Tilak was 10 was a lucky accident. He got a chance to learn under the best of teachers there. Tilak matriculated in his 16th year and joined the Deccan College. At Deccan College, there were many renowned professors like Wordsworth, Chute and Chatri, but Tilak relied for his education more of his independent and extensive reading than on the lectures and notes. Tilak took his BA degree in 1877 with first class in mathematics, and 2 years later he became a Bachelor of Laws. Tilak and his close friend Mr. Agaka had an idea to establish private school on the model of missionary institutions. For a young man with a first-class degree to take a vow of self-sacrifice and dedication to public service was unheard of in 1879. Many disapproved of Tilak's decision. His fellow graduates got well-paid jobs. They pitied Tilak for his impractical outlook. Visha Shastri, Chiplanga, Agaka and Tilak inaugurated the new English school on January 1st, 1880. It is a red-letter day in the history of national education. Their school proved such a success that within 4 years, there were more than 1,000 students. In 1881, Tilak and his colleagues established 2 weeklies, namely Maratha in English and Kesari in Marathi. Mr. Agaka took charge of Kesari and Tilak took charge of Maratha. By these, he was recognized as Awakener of India. As Kesari became a daily and continuous publication in these days. Like the New English School, the 2 journals proved a big success. The Kesari became the largest circulated Indian language newspaper within 2 years, and Maratha gained a reputation as the mouthpiece of educated opinion in Western India. In 1885, they formed the Deccan Education Society. Opinion in Maharashtra was agitated by the plight of the minor Maharaja of Kalabar. Both Kesari and Maratha published letters purporting to be written by 61 M. Bavri, which implicated him in a foul conspiracy for criminal defamation filed by Barba. Agaka and Tilak were sentenced to 4-month imprisonment on July 12, 1882. It was the first Tilak's imprisonment. Tilak had spent the 10 best years of his youth in the service of New English School and the Deccan Educational Society. After that, Tilak resigned from Deccan Education Society and he devoted more time and attention to Kesari and Maratha. In 1887, the circulation of the Kesari rose to 5,000, but the profits made by it were wiped out by the losses incurred on the Maratha. The battle between social reforms and orthodoxies were joined when Tilak grew to manhood. Aga Khan, who was once his intimate friend, was a champion of social reform. Tilak, on the other hand, to receive prior attention, Hitler was not against social reform, but he did not want to force down the throat of a society for whose uplift it was meant. Tilak did not want to anglicize the institution and so denationalize them in the name of social reform. The 17 years between Tilak's resignation from the Deccan Education Society in 1890 and his conviction on the charge of the sedition in 1897 formed the crucial years of his life. They marked his transition from an educationalist to the politician and from provincial to national leadership. At the time, he conducted 2 weekly journals and a law class. He also waged a running war with social reformers. He inaugurated the Ganapati and the Shivaji festivals. He also became a councillor of the Pune municipality, a fellow to Bombay University Senate, and a member of Bombay's Legislative Council. He rendered enormous service in the plague epidemic. He was active at the National Congress and provincial political conference sessions. He also wrote The Orient, which attracted the admiring attention of world-renowned scholars like Professor Max Muller. Tilak transformed the traditional Ganapati festival and Shivaji festival into a social occasion. These festivals became anti-government propaganda. When Ran and Is were murdered in Pune on June 22, 1897, Tilak was arrested in Bombay on July 27. There was apparently no connection between those 2 events. The prosecution of a charge of sedition being based on a poem and articles in Shivaji published in the Kesari. Tilak was sentenced 18 months imprisonment. In 1901, Tilak was sentenced again to 18 months imprisonment and a fine 1,000 rupees under Section 476 of the Criminal Procedure Code in Tar Maharaj case. In 1906, Tilak started non-cooperation movement which Gandhi launched 14 years later. Tilak believed that Swadeshi and boycott would prove a potent political weapon. Tilak led establishing the Bombay Swadeshi cooperative stores in 1906, which is still flourishing. He toured all over Maharashtra to popularize Swadeshi movement. He used only Swadeshi goods for his personal and household needs. He also used Swadeshi paper for his journals. Today, August 1st, 2020 is the 100th anniversary of his death. Freedom from British rule was the ruling portion of Tilak's life. He was a scholar, thinker, a philosopher, and politician. That's why he was, as Mahatma Gandhi is the father of nation, so is Lokmanya Tilak, the father of Indian nationalism. Mahatma Gandhi called him the maker of modern India. Thank you.
More from Yangon, the recipient of National Award twice with his very engaging talk. Thank you very, very much. We now have another very interesting speaker waiting to join us from Pune, Mr. Peter Nagugi, a Kenyan scholar majoring in international relations with economics from SIU Pune. He effortlessly assumes different leadership roles, working closely with student bodies and embassies in India, and collaborates with Symbiosis Center for International Education to curate and organize webinars for African students in India to facilitate collaborative problem solving, divergent thinking, and a startup culture. Good afternoon, Mr. Peter. Are you there? We're very happy to have you with us and for participating. We thank you for participating in this international webinar. Kindly deliver your talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be lying if I'd say that I am not equally nervous and excited by this moment. And I remember before coming here today, I sent a message to my director and I told her, I am excited and intimidated in equal proportions. But she said, my blessings and my positive vibrations are with you today. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And I remember actually when my director, Dr. Anita Patanka, requested me to come and give a speech about an Indian freedom fighter called Lokmanya Tilak. I was stuck in a moment of disbelief and doubt regarding this name, Lokmanya, because I'll tell you why. So back in 2010, after finishing my high school education in Kenya, I started a small computer business, a small computer shop. And in parallel, I used to sell movies, small films, Bollywood movies in particular. And that's how I actually got to know about India. And so I had one client, bald, bulky, masculine fellow. His name was Peter, just like me. And he used to fancy coming and sitting in my workshop and tell me about his days in the military. He used to be a military serviceman. And so he once told me about a concept called LOKMANYA. Now, LOKMANYA means sixth sense, the sixth sense. And everybody in the military must have this sixth sense. So when I heard about LOKMANYA, I was trying to, you know, that's where my brain took me, LOKMANYA. So I thought actually Lokmanya Tilak was a serviceman in Kenya, you know. However, it dawned upon me that Lokmanya Tilak was a noble man and a visionary whose timeless efforts have woven the very that holds modern India. And where we are today, actually, Ferguson College, it's in this very edifice. It stands as a monument of his timeless efforts, sacrifices, struggle, and the vision that Lokmanya Tilak and other visionary freedom fighters in India had for India. So thank you very much, actually, for the audience that is standing today here in Pune, FC College. The dignitaries sitting in the dais, and the wonderful audience that we are having watching us from different parts of the world. I would like to say Jambo and Namaste. So as we pay a sentinel tribute to Lokmanya Tilak, it is imperative that we acknowledge and recognize that he lives among us. Good. Thank you. It is very imperative that we acknowledge and recognize that he lives among us, and that his works has touched each and every of us in a million profound ways. A good example for me, actually, would be Dr. Majumdar. I am a student of Symbiosis International University, and Dr. Majumdar is the founder of the university. And at the same time, he was a professor of botany at Ferguson College. Now we can see the parallels, we can see the connection of how the vision that Dr. Tilak, Lokmanya Tilak had for India has had an influence in creating more noble men in India, like Dr. Majumdar, who has made his benevolence a constant stream of blessings and encouragement for international students, especially in the Afro-Asian society who were studying in India, to ensure that we do have a home away from home. Now today I will not go in detail because we've had a stream of very profound and prolific speakers who have a strong understanding of the works and the life of Lokmanya Tilak. So I'll just briefly mention on how I feel that Lokmanya Tilak, was he a doctor? I'm still trying to figure out his academic, because I'll tell you one thing that I remember my mama once told me. My mother said, "It is worth more to be a noble man than to be the greatest ruler of the world." And she followed up by quoting a Bible verse for me and said, "A good name, it is better than silver and gold." Now today we're here celebrating a great man, Dr. Lokmanya Tilak, with a wonderful, brilliant name, a name that inspires us. I might have not met Dr. Lokmanya Tilak. I don't know why I keep calling him doctor, but he was a doctor of life, I would say. I might have not met Lokmanya Tilak, but for sure, his good and wonderful ways have influenced me in so many ways already, and I'll tell you how. So while reading about Lokmanya Tilak, I couldn't help but notice the striking similarities he shares with Nelson Mandela of South Africa, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. In one of his famous quotes, Lokmanya Tilak, he said, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I must have it." And so that reminded me of one funny quote that we also have in Kenya during the Mau Mau struggle. And so back then, before we didn't have, my people never had so much exposure and command with the English language. But we did struggle and find ways to communicate to the white man. And one of the Mau Mau freedom fighters said, "In the Demi Namadadi, Idhaka is ours. No one can tune us." That translates to, from the beginning of time, this land belongs to us, and nobody can take it. And so I can see the wonderful correlation between the works and the vision of Lokmanya Tilak, and the same pattern and struggles, the vision and the progress that we've had so far in Africa. And so, as we see all of them, Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, their struggle for emancipation led all of them to a similar path. They were all detained. And each of Tilak's 3 imprisonments show more clearly the moral stuff and the quality of the man under the test and glare of suffering. These 3 imprisonments have been the seals of Lokmanya Tilak's career and life that we are celebrating today. Now, I'll adumbrate them slowly, one by one, without taking too much time. And I hope Mr. Adesh Yeah, you'll keep time for me. So the first imprisonment found him one of a small knot of a pioneer workers. It reflects a strong and a flexible leader of strong and steady people, the Maratha people. I mean, in fact, I have been trying to learn Marathi, the Marathi language, and I have picked up a few things. One is Jawanchala, Jawanzala, have you eaten? And the next one is Abariya He. Thank you very much. So, yeah, and so it reflects the works of Lokmanya Tilak to his people. The second imprisonment bestowed upon him the aspiring power of a great awakening of the Maratha spirit. However, it left him an uncrowned king of the Deccan and gave him the high reputation across India, which became the cornerstone of his commanding influence. The last one, but not the least, it cemented his leadership of an all-Indian party, which was subsequently followed by his efforts to unite India. And in fact, he played a very significant role and a very pivoting role in signing the Lucknow Pact that brought about the Hindu-Muslim unity in 1916. So we can see it is very evident that Lokmanya Tilak was a great proponent of unity, inclusion, in diversity. A subject that has become very prominent now, that we've been discussing now. But you see, this great visionary started way back, before time. Now for me, as Peter Ngugi, Lokmanya Tilak's socio-political ideals resonate with me very much. Even more today, actually. Noteworthy are three of his striking thoughts. And this is where I strongly believe that we can agree together. One is a common language is an important element of nationality. And I think Lokmanya Tilak was fought very ferociously about the need to have a common culture. He was one of the greatest nationalists India has ever seen. He used Hindi as the language of the movement and was the first Congress leader to suggest that Hindi, written in the Devanagari script, be accepted as the sole national language of India. Now the second point, he was one of the first leaders. We good? Thank you. How many minutes? Oh, brilliant. He was one of the first leaders. He was one of the first leaders to come up with the idea of Swaraj. Time really baffles me. So Tilak talked about Dharma, and when he used the word Dharma, it did not imply religion, but it indicated the human duty, morality, and right action. This is why he argued that Swaraj was not only our human right, but Dharma, because he argued that it was the duty of every Indian to make effort for the attainment of Swaraj, and thus Swaraj ultimately became the Dharma of people of India. Now, because we're pressed by time, I'll come to my conclusion. And now that I've been granted this distinction to stand in front of you today, I would like to reiterate the belief that this nation, just like my own in Kenya, it is formed by the willingness of each of us to share in the responsibility of upholding common good. The story of Lokmanya Tilak reminds me that at this very moment during the pandemic, where we are all struggling and trying to get back to normal and struggling with the new normal, it reminds me that we all have a duty, and most of us might ask, I'm a small man, I'm a young man, how can I contribute to building my country? Well, if Lokmanya Tilak went to the prison for 6 years and wrote a book, well, what can you do while you're while you're still in confinement and while you're still struggling? So I'll end with an interesting poem from Zindagi na Milegi Dobara. Just 2 lines, just 2 stanzas. And it says, and I would like to reiterate this because we are happy to be alive today. And I'm happy to be here and see such lively faces. It says, दिलों में तू अपनी बेताबियां लेके जा रहे हो तो जिंदा हो तू.
There is a slight time constraint here. Thank you very much. That was indeed a very captivating talk. And with that, we end this second session of today's event. We shall begin the next session in a minute from now. Kindly stay with us. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third session of today's international webinar on Tilakji, where our eminent speakers will be talking about Tilakji's worldview. Our first speaker for this session is from Raipur today, Dr. Sushil Trivedi, an Indian Administrative Service officer who has served in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. He has written and translated more than 40 books and is the proud recipient of several state and national level awards for his contribution to literature and culture. I extend a very warm welcome to you, sir, and kindly invite you to open the session with your talk.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, a warm welcome to you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Kindly open the session with your talk, please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I thank the organizers, particularly
Honorable Dr. Vinay Sastry, President of Indian Council for Conservation, for inviting me to join this international webinar on the theme of Lokmanya Tilak on Swaraj to Atmanirbhar. I pay my heartfelt tribute to Lokmanya Tilak, and ladies and gentlemen, it has been very rightly observed that Lokmanya Tilak was primarily a man of action. However, he was a wonderful and luminous scholar who had astonished the politicians, historians, and philosophers all over the world with his versatile and comprehensive genius. His genius formed the background of a strong-willed personality. He was a rare kind of scholar politician whose vision of the world had emerged from his struggle for the rights of people and deep study of ethics and philosophy. At a time when Indian men of learning were utilizing British rule, the masses had gone lethargic and were oblivious of their degradation, and darkness had entered India. Tilak appeared on the horizon and infused into the minds of people self-respect and courage to stand up for their rights. Tilak was known as the herald of Asian nationals, as he had inspired the leader of Asian countries to lead the fight against imperialism. Dr. Sukarno, the then Indonesian president, testified this fact when, at a meeting at Bombay, he had said he derived inspiration from freedom struggle from India and his leader Tilak. Tilak was the first leader who recognized that no imperialism is artistic. Leaders all over the world, and particularly those fighting imperialism in the British colony, watched Tilak's starving career. They were not only surprised at the political moves, but were also awed at his intellectual and philosophical prowess. Tilak fought through his life for man's right to control the destiny. This is very important. Tilak fought his whole life for the man's right to control the destiny. This fight is still going on. This fight is still going on in many parts of the world, and the words and fight continue to inspire the studying people, and therefore the worldview of Tilak is much relevant to the present day situation of the world. Tilak had conceived Swaraj in the early 90s of the 19th century. He wanted to liberate people not only from the foreign shackles, but also he wanted to liberate their body and soul. He urged people to rise for what truly is their self-respect, self-prosperity, and self-rule. His word, freedom is the soul and the spirit of a nation. Freedom is the soul and the spirit of a nation, and the indestructible soul persists so as the spirit of freedom. Without freedom, there is no life. One cannot kill or burn the concept. Vedic religion teaches us to be free from adharma. Tilak had advocated Karma Yoga, who took action of human beings for welfare of society. According to Tilak, God and nation are the same. God and nation are the same. Any action for God or nation takes one to ultimate moksha or oneness to God. So, if there is a nation as a body, the idea of freedom is soul. If there is a nation as a body, then the idea of freedom is soul. Action for betterment of nation is a new Vedanta. Action for betterment of nation is a new Vedanta. And our country are not different. God and our country are not different. Our country is one. The love of nation, like love of God, has to transcend narrow conventionalism and communism. Originality and versatility were the characteristics genius. So he wanted to write so many books, but we could find time only write 3 books. The Orion in English, the Archetype Home in the Vedas in English again, and Srimad Bhagavad Gita or Karma Yoga, Karma Yoga Shastra in Marathi language. Theme of all these 3 books are different, and they are very novel and very captivating. The Orion takes the antiquity of Vedas back to 6000 BC, a claim which Western scholars have at last grudgingly accepted. It is interesting to note that after the publication of the Orion, Tilak carried on correspondence with several philosophers in the world, particularly with Professor Max Muller, on various philological and astronomical points. Very important. The Archetype Home in the Vedas prove that the cradle of the Aryans was not the Caucasus mountain, but the Abyssinian region of North Pole. Both these volumes suggested new viewpoints and compelled the intellectuals, historians, and philosophers regarding the early history of the Aryans. The way Tilak had established the antiquity of Vedas and the abode of Aryans in the North Pole, it brought to light a new theory of development of civilization in the world. He had proved his theory on the basis of a study of geology, archaeology, comparative mythology, and comparative philology, and so on. On the basis of these two books, Tilak was recognized as a philosopher leader. Tilak was recognized as a philosopher leader, although his greatest work on the world philosophy was yet to come. And then came Tilak's magnum opus, that is Srimad Bhagavad Gita Rahat or Karma Yoga Shastra. It established a new and convincing theory of Karma Yoga. He established that Gita advocates the performance of action in the world, even after the actor has achieved the highest union with the supreme deity by Gyan, that is knowledge, or by Bhakti, that is devotion. This action must be done to keep the world going by the right path of evolution which the Creator has destined the world to follow. In order that the action may not bind the actor, it must be done with the aim of helping his purpose and without any attachment to the coming result. In this way, Tilak exhorted the lesson of Gita is Karma Yoga. The lesson of Gita is Karma Yoga. He said, Jnana Yoga is there, Bhakti Yoga is also there, but they are both subservient to Karma Yoga. That is, Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are subservient to Karma Yoga. And that is the thing that is preached by Gita. If Gita was preached in responding to Arjuna to make him ready for the fight, to take action, how can it be said that the ultimate lesson of the great book of the Gita is Bhakti or Jnana Yoga alone? Tilak explained that there is blending of these yogas in Gita. He explained, as in the air, it is not oxygen or hydrogen or any other gas alone, but a composition of all these in a certain proportion. So in the Gita, all these yogas are blended into one. He differed from almost all the other commentators on the Gita, who said they wanted liberty. But Tilak explained pravritti when he said that Gita enjoins action. When he said Gita enjoins action even after the perfection in Jnana and Bhakti was attained. And the deity is revealed through these mediums. Now there is fundamental unity underlying Ishwar, man, and the world. The world is in existence because Ishwar has built it to be. It is the will of the Ishwar that holds it together. Man strives to gain union with Ishwar, and when this union is achieved, the individual is merged into the mighty universal will. When this is achieved, would the individual say, I shall do no action, or I shall not have the world. The world which is there because the will which he has thought, union has willed it so. So it does not continue. I must say, Tilak emphatically said that it is not who is saying the thing. The Gita says so. And he further says, Sri Krishna himself says that there is nothing in all these three worlds that he needs to acquire. Still, he acts because he did not, the world will be ruined. If a man seeks unity with the deity, he must necessarily seek unity with the interest of the world also. A man wants to seek unity with the deity, that is Ishwar, he must necessarily seek unity with the interest of the world and work for it. If he does not, then the unity is not perfect, then you cannot get your moksha. The Karma Yoga, which Tilak had advocated, was not a new theory. Neither was the discovery of the law of karma. The knowledge of the law is so ancient that even Sri Krishna, who was the first teacher who propounded it, must be remembered that the Karma Yoga has been our sacred heritage from times immemorial. When Indians were seated, this is very important. Karma Yoga has been our sacred heritage from times immemorial when Indians were sitting on the high pedestal of wealth and law, that is, we were wealthy and very knowledgeable. Karma Yoga, asked to put it under the law of duty, is the combination of all that is best in spiritual science, in action, in actual action, and in an unselfish meditative life. Compliance with this universal law leads to realization of most cherished ideal of man. Tilak made it very clear that such was the doctrine taught by your forefathers, who never intended that the goal of life should be meditation alone. This is very important. He underlines that doctrine taught by your forefathers, who never indicated the goal of life should be meditation alone. No one can expect providence to protect one who sits with folded hands and throws his burden on others. God does not help the indolent. You must be doing all that you can do to lift yourself up, and then only you may rely on the Almighty to help you. You should not, I will presume, that you have to toil, that you have safety. This is again very important. You have to toil so that the fruits may be reaped by your other generation. That cannot be the case. Let us try our utmost and leave the generation to come to enjoy that fruit. Let the advantage go to our children and their descendants. It is only given to us to toil and work. It is only given to us to toil and work. And so, there ought to be no relaxation in our work, lest we incur the curse of those who come after this. This is very true when we talk about the environment. Action alone must be our guiding principle. Action disinterested after well thought out. It does not matter who the sovereign is. It is enough we have full liberty to elevate ourselves in the best possible manner. This is called the immutable dharma. And karma yoga is nothing but the method which leads us to the attainment of dharma. Karma leads us to dharma. That is very important. Unless we don't do that, we cannot achieve the dharma. It is neither creditable nor beneficial if other people have to do everything for us. God has declared His will. He has willed that self can be exalted only through its own effort. Everything lies in your own hands. Karma Yoga does not look upon this world as nothing. It requires only that your motive should be untainted by self-interest. It requires that your motive should be untainted by self-interest and passion. This is true view of the practical dharma, that is selflessness. Tilak has given the greatest call to the world, particularly to India. Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it to the country and inspire the millions and millions of people to join the freedom struggle. Tilak said that Swaraj is the national consequence of diligent performance of duty. Let us see how Swaraj is connected with the Karma Yoga. Tilak said that Swaraj is the national consequence of diligent performance of duty. The Karma Yogi is strive for Swaraj, and the Gani or the spiritualist yearn for it. That is, Karma Yogi works for it, and Gani only meditates on it. Tilak said himself, what is then Swaraj? It is life centered in self, dependent upon self. There is Swaraj in the world as well as in the world hereafter. The rishis who had let down the law of duty, that is Karma Yoga, betook themselves to forest because the people were already enjoying Swaraj. That time when the rishis went to forest for sannyas, people were already enjoying Swaraj or the people who village, which was administered and defended in the first instance by the kings. Tilak was convinced to the core that Swaraj in the life to come cannot be rewarded as people who have not enjoyed it in this world. So unless we struggle take to steps, we cannot get Swaraj. Therefore, he differed from all the other leaders. He wanted real action to be done, not only petitioning or really requesting the government to give us freedom. We wanted people to fight and come on the street and lead their struggle. Tilak said that we demand Swaraj as it is the foundation and not the height of our future prosperity. Swaraj is the foundation, not the height of the future. Swaraj does not at all imply a denial of Karma Yoga. He made it clear that those who can efficiently manage their own efforts may be illiterate, but they are not therefore idiots. They are as intelligent as any educated man. And if they could understand their village concerns, they should not find any difficulty in grasping the principle of God. If illiteracy is not a disqualification in civil law, Tilak made it clear, there is no reason why it should not be so in nature's law. The illiterate are brothers who have the same rights and are actuated by the same aspiration. It is therefore or bounden duty to awaken the masses. Here comes the very different. He wanted Swaraj for the people of country to promote Swadeshi and to Bahishkar, that is Vaikat Videshi, and to ensure, this is very important, to ensure that the people get national education. He has talked about Swaraj. He had the principles of democracy in his mind. He was watching the development in the revolution that is taking place all around, particularly in Russia. He was hopeful that revolution all around the world will bring democracy. He was keenly assessing the progress of fight for freedom taking place in neighboring countries also, and was giving moral support to them. Very importantly, he had studied the education system in Europe and America and wanted that the modern scientific education be made available to the people. Tilak's program, the national education, consisted of the subject of our national traditional knowledge combined with modern science and vocational professional subjects. He wanted research to flourish in India. He was taking that was taking place in the West. He had studied the development of agriculture industry in Asia and Western countries. On the knowledge of this study, he had formed a clear idea about the future state of economy in India. He had studied the importance of agriculture. Okay. I must say, Tilak's life was an embodiment of struggle, suffering, and aspiration of the people. He was an institution, a school of thought by himself. With his lucid simplicity of his genius, he had changed the course of history. He will ever be a font of inspiration for action, service, devotion, and sacrifice to those who struggle to reach their liberty of all. At the end, I pay my tribute to Lokmanya Tilak. I recall the words of great revolutionary and philosopher Sri Aurobindo, who had said that Tilak's name is stand for liberty, and Tilak is national builder, one of the greatest political personalities, liberal figures, the representative man of nation in the most critical period of India's destiny. A name to be remembered gratefully so long as the country has pride in its past and hope for the future. If we have pride in the past and hope for the future, it is Tilak who is to guide there. Mahatma Gandhi therefore called him the maker of the nation. Mahatma Gandhi followed the Gita also. Mahatma Gandhi also write on the lines of Tilak Gita Mata. I once again thank the President of the ICCR, Sri Sahasrabudhe, for giving me an opportunity to pay my tribute to Lokmanya Tilak. I also thank all the participants and others those who are watching this webinar all over the globe. Thank you very much.
That was Shri Sushil Trivedi ji from Raipur with his very engaging talk. Thank you very much, sir. We shall now move to London, where our director of the Nehru Centre, London, Shri Amish Tripathi, would be taking over. Shri Amish Tripathi needs no introduction since his hugely popular books, which have sold 5.5 million copies worldwide, do the talking for him. I would nevertheless take the pleasure to mention that Amish ji has been ranked as the top 100 most influential celebrities in India and has been selected as an Eisenhower Fellow. This is a prestigious American program for outstanding leaders from around the world. Welcome to the international webinar, Amish ji. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for your kindness and grace in your introduction. To thank and congratulate the Honorable President of ICCR, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe ji, for organizing this very important program on the anniversary of Lokmanya Tilak ji. Lokmanya Tilak ji is a role model and a source of inspiration and hope for all of us patriotic Indians. He was genuinely the first national leader of the modern era and is a source of inspiration for all of us. Thank you so much, Vinay ji, for organizing this program. And of course, to the entire ICCR team, which has worked tirelessly to put this very well organized multi-national, multi-locational program together. And very much in the beat of Lokmanya Tilak ji, as Amit Shah ji said in the morning, Lokmanya Tilak ji spoke of freedom and pride for India, but he also spoke of reform, of how to bring everyone together. And ICCR has not just brought the nation together, it has brought even people from across the world together to celebrate this program. So my gratefulness to ICCR as well. And has fallen to me to introduce the speaker, the main speaker for this segment, and he is Sanket Kulkarni. Sanket is with us already. Sanket is also based in London. And if I may introduce Sanket, and then of course I will leave it to him to take us through his introduction. Sanket Kulkarni is based in London and works as a principal consultant for a startup that provides management advisory services. He's been working in the banking and financial services sector for more than 16 years now and specializes in commodities and risk management. He travels a lot due to the nature of his work. This globe-trotting and his curious nature enables him to constantly learn about new cultures and customs, which he thoroughly enjoys. Outside work, he has history. Before the COVID pandemic, he could be found in the British Library or the Royal Asiatic Society, mostly every Saturday, reading or researching manuscripts, primary sources, and documents mainly pertaining to Maratha history. The British Newspaper Archive is the place where he browses and collects articles on various interesting topics. The images of the newspaper articles that he's going to show in his presentation today are from the same place. He writes regularly on a variety of history-related subjects on blog as well as on Facebook. He manages and is part of a 40,000 plus user community on Facebook that promotes reference-based and evidence-based writing, research, and scholarship. Over to you, Sanket. Please wow us with your knowledge.
Thank you, Amishji. I'm going to share my screen so that we see the slides. Okay. Are my slides visible?
Yes, they are.
Thank you, Amishji. Thank you, Amishji. Good afternoon, all. I feel immensely honored to be speaking here today in a very august company of dignified speakers and guests to mark Lokmanya Tilak's centenary. As a part of this session on Lokmanya Tilak's worldview, I will be speaking about contemporary British newspapers and Lokmanya Tilak. Why newspapers? Well, it is said that a good newspaper is a nation talking to itself. In this session, I will be presenting a few interesting and mostly unseen articles that had appeared in the mainstream British newspapers, which expressed views about events and thoughts related to Lokmanya Tilak. In a way, these are our windows to the past that allow us to look back in time. All the articles that I will be showing you today were published in Britain, the then epicenter of the British Raj. Let us start with the famous sedition case of 1897. Lokmanya Tilak had written about the teachings of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj in his newspaper Kesari that were termed seditious in connection with the murder of Plague Commissioner Rand. This case got a lot of publicity in Britain because Lokmanya Tilak was a councillor in the Legislative Assembly of Bombay. Many newspapers published articles about this case. What we see here is a first ever sketch of Lokmanya Tilak published in a British newspaper. Let us take a moment to appreciate the fact that it must have been painstaking to create a block of Lokmanya Tilak's sketch and then print it in the newspaper. But still it was done, which tells us the curiosity that this case had generated abroad. The article also states that Tilak is admittedly a man of great ability who has devoted this newspaper to preaching the gospel of Marathas. Moving on. What we see next is the courtroom scene of the sedition case. We see a 39-year-old inexperienced Justice Strachey on the left and the jury in the middle, which comprised of 6 Europeans and 3 Parsis. None of them spoke Marathi to verify if the article in question was seditious or not. And finally, Lokmanya Tilak standing in the dock on the right. The outcome of the case, Lokmanya Tilak convicted, no surprises there. Of course, there were some impartial and imperial newspapers that felt that the trial was carried out in a proper manner, and here is one of them. Here we see a newspaper that published, Tirak in fact receives just the right kind of sentence after just the right kind of trial. Imperial view, yes. There were also some newspapers like this one who knew that Lokmanya Tilak was convicted unjustly. This newspaper reports, if Mr. Tilak was popular before, he is 10 times more so now that he has been sacrificed in this unfair and ungenerous manner. And the unpopularity of the government has increased in proportion to the popularity of Mr. Tilak. Very clear. This paints a very clear picture of the situation. Here on, we move to the sedition case of 1908. Just to give you a quick background, on 30th April 1908, two young men from Bengal, Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki, attempted to assassinate the British magistrate of Alipur. His name was Douglas Kingsford. He was infamous for wrongly convicted young men who acted against the British administration. Unfortunately, the bomb thrown by Khudiram to kill Kingsford killed two ladies. Khudiram was caught and Prafulla committed suicide in the skirmish. Lokmanya Tilak was the only newspaper editor who wrote and published articles in support of those men. In his article, he wrote, "The obstinacy of the white bureaucracy has driven the Bengalis to excesses. Thus, the downtrodden native has compelled to adopt Russian methods, that is bombs, and transgress all legal bounds." Clearly, indeed, Lokmanya revolution brewing in Russia, and technology for the bomb was acquired from there. Now we have similar. Well, it was worse than 1897. Lokmanya Tilak was to be transported to Mandalay in Burma for 6.5 years. Now, this was the cell in Mandalay jail where Lokmanya Tilak spent 6.5 years of his sentence. While Lokmanya Tilak was in Mandalay, the common people of India were revering the holy trinity of Lal Bal Pal, that is, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal. And this trio was literally worshipped in the holy trinity form. Here is a sample of one such picture postcard that you can see here that was sold during those days, and surprisingly this image is from a British newspaper, tells us a story about it. Lokmanya Tilak spent his years in Mandalay and was released in June 1914. He returned to Pune, and in about a month or so the first war began in Europe. Lokmanya Tilak clearly expressed that if proper training and officer commissions were provided, Indians must enroll in the armed forces. The demand for home rule and a trained army would definitely benefit India. Moreover, India could not cope the burden of Germans or Russians should Britain lose the war. Here he clearly states, nothing was farther from the minds of the Indian people than the idea that the presence of either the Russians or the Germans would be beneficial to them. While Lokmanya Tilak was in Mandalay, the then editor of Times, Sir Valentin Chirol, had published a book titled Indian Unrest. He had termed Lokmanya Tilak the father of the Indian unrest. Lokmanya Tilak decided to file a libel case against Chirol and this defamatory remark. He was even prepared to go to England to fight the case. He had a clear agenda in mind: to unite the Indian Home Rule supporters in Britain and to sue Chirol, who was merely a symbolic representation of the British administration. Before Lokmanya Tilak could travel to England, he was denied permission, citing war reasons that was going on in Europe. The British administration even tried to book him for one more seditious speech that he had delivered at Belgaum. They had planned and planted civil dress CID officers in the audience who took notes of the speech and reported back. Lokmanya Tilak had said, "The high-handedness should be ended and the authority should come in our hands. when you made a demand in political matters, you are told you are effeminate, etc. In this manner, the roguery is practiced. He was openly calling the British administration high-handed and rogue. Barrister Muhammad Ali Jinnah defended this case and Lokmanya Tilak was acquitted. While Lokmanya Tilak was fiercely fighting against the policies of the British administration, he was asking his countrymen to join the armed forces. Home Rule League even started a fund called India Defence Fund. Lokmanya Tilak went on to say that it cannot happen that ruling will be done by you as an Indians and fighting for you will be done by Europeans or Japanese. He urged people, if you want home rule, be prepared to defend your home. A very clear message there. Finally, Lokmanya Tilak was granted the permission to travel to England. He was already in communication with the British Labour Party, who were sympathetic towards the Home Rule League. A Labour Party member, his name was George Lansbury, was the owner of a weekly called Daily Herald. They were eager to welcome Lokmanya Tilak. Lokmanya Tilak reached London on 30th October 1918. This is how he was welcomed by the Labour Party. It wrote, Mr. Tilak has served 6 years in prison. He does not complain. And we can see clear sympathy there. Lokmanya Tilak was based in London, but he visited Cambridge, Oxford, Birmingham, Bristol, and many places in Scotland. He addressed many public meetings and discussed the challenges that India had. The advertisements of these meetings appeared in many newspapers, as you can see here. Wherever Lokmanya Tilak went, there was always a conversation and an accusation around the racial, social, and religious diversity India had, which supposedly rendered the self-government impossible. This is what the British administration claimed, and they always did that. Lokmanya
details about that, just in case?
Newspapers, because the date you had passed not get vehicles to go back home, etc. Some people just laughed it off, saying that people were troubled because of that. But some people or some newspapers were sincere in mentioning that Tilak was a nationalist. Around 3rd to 5th of August in the newspapers. Yes.
And second curiosity was after he was imprisoned, I mean, sentenced for imprisonment there in Mandalay, whether there were any dissenting voices in United Kingdom, in Britain, whether some people might have protested against this injustice.
Yes, a couple of cases wherein there were some socialist newspapers in England. One of them was called Justice, and which raised voice against this transportation. And there was another newspaper article which published that around the 1912 Delhi Darbar, when the capital was moved to Delhi from Calcutta, uh, there was a talk that Tilak could be released from Mandalay, because around that time there was an outbreak of cholera in Mandalay, and Tilak was offered some conditions. If he followed those conditions, or he agreed to accept them, he could be released earlier. And one of the conditions, one of the unofficial dossier here reported in the newspaper mentions that Tilak was to retire in Germany and not to return back to India. But Tilak clearly denied that, and he proceeded to finish his sentence.
Great to know all these things. It was really very insightful. And the member secretary of the Indian Council for Social Science Research is right here sitting besides me. And he has told me to request you that if you could send all these clippings, I mean, of course, the photocopies of them, then we are going to come out with a volume of the proceedings of this particular webinar. In that, we would be more than happy to publish them. And if there is any additional material on Lokmanya Tilak, which you must have so very painstakingly found out from the archives, for which we are really very grateful to you, because through you, we have been able to understand how Tilak was viewed in those times, during his lifetime, by the Britishers, against whom, in a way, he waged a very relentless war, kind of, for the freedom of India. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, I have more than 150 articles I'm happy to share. I'll do that gladly.
Sanketji, please send your articles.
Yes,
Thank you
we'll
so
do that.
much. Thank you so much for the very engrossing talk with intricate details.
Thank you.
And with that, we
washes away many memories. But the life of Bal Gangadhar Tilak remains with us, nourishing the mind and heart of free India. The crowded years of his life are part of our history. Let us recall those tempestuous days and join the Lokmanya where he lived, worked and fought. The boy from Ratnagiri in the Konkan, born in a lower middle-class family, inherited many fine qualities from his learned father, Gangadhar Shastri. Leaving his birthplace, Tilak made his way to Pune, a city with many historic associations. In 1872, he joined the Deccan College. This was to be his home during the most formative years of his life. Soon, his restless mind was absorbed in the study of a wide variety of subjects. Kerunana Chhatre, who taught mathematics, encouraged Tilak's interest in analytical geometry and astronomy. The young student was no bookworm. He exercised his frail body, determined to conquer physical weakness. Here too, with Gopal Ganesh Agarkar, Tilak discussed the problems of the day, became aware of the plight of his people. Many hours the two friends spent together near the Deccan College. Even today, one feels their shadowy presence. Roused his people from the apathy of centuries. Great Makshmullah, a scholar of international repute, paid tribute to Tilak's scholarship. Meanwhile, Kesari had given the call for the mass celebration of festivals to glorify Ganpati, the god of learning, and Shivaji, the symbol of India's will to be free. These festivals became a powerful lever for political awakening. Then came the terrible famine of 1896. Tilak began organizing relief measures to bring food to a starving peasantry. A year later, the bubonic plague struck. Once again, Kesari led the battle for survival. Pune had become a city of the dead and the dying. The epidemic had spread rapidly. A mass exodus was on. To check the contagious disease, the British authorities gave unlimited power to an officer named Rand, whose high-handedness and rough methods caused untold suffering. Tilak, fearless, indomitable, stayed on in Pune and went to the aid of a haunted people. He organized a hospital and called upon government to treat the victims of the plague with sympathy. The epidemic raged. So did the oppression of a merciless bureaucracy, which refused to enlist the cooperation of the public. A city's wrath had now been kindled. On June 22nd, returning from Government House, Rand, the tyrant of Pune, was a marked man. Revenge had been taken. But before dawn, the hunt for the assassin had begun in the city. From his headquarters, Tilak thundered against the power was being challenged by a man who had become the spokesman of a whole people. His voice must therefore be silenced. The trial took place in the Bombay High Court. The great patriot was sentenced for sedition. The scene shifts to Dongri jail. The date, September 14th, 1897. On this day, Tilak, the scholar and patriot, began an 18 months rigorous imprisonment, registered as a common criminal. No The memorable Paisa Fund helped finance new Swadeshi industries. These struck at the roots of foreign exploitation. Kesari called for nationwide boycotts, for a patriotic spirit in every field of activity, and for a new education. Tilak also led the campaign against social evils. Dadabhai Naoroji was president of the Indian National Congress in 1906, a session which approved Tilak's new program. A year later, however, at the Surat session, a serious split developed within the Congress over the new policy. Tilak fought on. Disunity encouraged the rulers to order countrywide repression. Muzaffarpur in Bengal replied with bombs. Many struggles and sacrifices faced India's millions. The British moved to silence Tilak, the father of Indian unrest. Bombay's High Court was the scene of Tilak's historic trial in 1908. The judge enters the courtroom. The drama has begun. Tilak is in the prisoner's cage. The Advocate General, with great vehemence, describes the crimes of the accused. It is an unequal battle against the organized might of an empire. Tilak does not flinch. He prepares his own defense, speaks for a whole nation. A closely guarded jury begins to deliberate on whether Tilak is guilty. Within an hour and a quarter, the jury emerges. There is silence. Soon the verdict is pronounced. He is guilty. The judge asks the accused if he has anything to say. The atmosphere is electric. Then Tilak's voice is heard, strong and clear. All I wish to say is that in spite of the verdict of the jury, I maintain that I am innocent. There are higher powers that rule the destiny of things, and it may be the will of Providence that the cause which I represent is to prosper more by my suffering than by my remaining free. The people protested. Giant strikes by workers took place for the first time. Tilak began his sentence. He was to be banished from his land and people, transported to the notorious central jail of Mandalay in far-off Burma. Six years of solitary confinement begin. In summer, Mandalay was a veritable furnace. There was no protection from heat or dust. Even the birds perished. Tilak would mother them and also find the precious water to save the withering plants in the jail compound. A letter heavily censored would arrive from home once every 3 months. In these impossible conditions, Tilak resolved to continue his research, particularly in mathematics and astronomy. Back in Pune, tragedy engulfed Tilak's family. His wife Satya Ramabai passed away in 1912. The death came as a cruel blow to Tilak. One chapter of my life is closed, he wrote, and I am afraid it won't be long before another will be. During Lokmanya's absence, political activity in India stagnated. The National Congress was losing its hold over the people. Even its pandals were empty. Mandalay, Tilak searched for a message that would give new heart to his countrymen. He turned to the Gita for guidance. On the eve of the epic battle of the Mahabharata, Arjun too was confused and demoralized. Did not Lord Krishna tell him, "Follow me and fight"? So must India act, selflessly. This was Tilak's Gita Rahasya. In India, celebrations announced the coronation of a new King Emperor, George V. Prisoners in hundreds were pardoned and set free. India's heroic son was not released. But in due course, the sentence ran out and Tilak returned. The whole country was filled with joy. In 1914, the world was at war and India turned to... Here in Gaikwadwada, representatives of all sections would come to discuss future plans. In 1916, at the Lucknow session, Tilak re-entered the Congress, united opposing sections, welded national unity. Very soon, his immortal words, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it," had become the battle cry of the freedom movement. In 1918, Tilak sailed to England to conduct a libel suit. In India, new repression was launched, and Mahatma Gandhi took command of the struggle. The Punjab, which had supplied fighting men to the Allies, felt the brunt of the terror. In April 1919, Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar was the scene of a ghastly slaughter. Tilak returned. Millions were joining the freedom struggle. The Congress held its session in Amritsar under the presidentship of Motilal Nehru. Some political reforms had been offered to cushion the revolt. Again, Tilak tried to reconcile different viewpoints. He then founded a new Congress Democratic Party upon principles which today are embodied in the Constitution of Free India. With tireless energy, he toured the country explaining his stand, urging the people to accept what was offered and to continue the fight for full freedom. In July 1920, Tilak arrived in Bombay and went to Sardar Griha, where he always stayed. He was to spend his last days here. He died on the 1st of August at the age of 65. The Tilak era of India's history had ended. A million people followed his body. A whole nation was plunged in grief. Mahatma Gandhi spoke the thoughts of India when he wrote, "Lokmanya Gangadhar Tilak is no more. It is difficult to believe of him as dead. He was so much a part of the people. A giant among men has fallen. The voice of the lion is hushed. For us, he will go down to the generations yet unborn as a maker of modern India. It is blasphemy to talk of such a man as dead. The permanent essence of him abides with us forever. Let us erect for the only Lokmanya of India an imperishable monument by weaving into our lives his bravery, his simplicity, his wonderful industry, and his love of his country.
concept of soft power is not very old. It has been just about maybe a couple of decades that the world started discussing about soft power. And in the Indian context, I believe there are some features which are very unique to the idea of India of soft power. And what are these features? I believe basically in the Indian context, India's soft power starts with a whole lot of attraction towards the idea of India, which we experience in every nook and corner of the world. And this particular attraction and curiosity about the idea of India takes us to a fund of goodwill that India enjoys all over the world. Now, when we talk about soft power, this goodwill has to be taken to a different level and converted into a kind of understanding about the idea of India. The moment world starts understanding the idea of India, I believe our objective of soft power could be very easily achieved.
India, the land of wonders. A land where there was wisdom when the rest of the world was learning the ropes of civilization. Amidst the malice of the Dark Ages, India gave the world a glimmer of hope. In the unstable times of violence and turmoil, a revolutionary principle was born in India. Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. Non-violence is the highest virtue. The idea of non-violence, which is still relevant and a core philosophy of this rapidly growing nation. Gandhiji's values and philosophy of ahimsa has inspired generations. India believes in making the world a beautiful place where everyone is part of one big family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, ancient Indian philosophy that considers the entire population as one giant family. A family that prospers with each other without any conflict or aggression. In today's age of seamless geographical boundaries and international partnerships, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam seems like the necessity of the future. India banks on its cultural strength and power that emphasizes on moral high ground. Sarvajan Hidai, Sarvajan Sukhai, for everyone's wellness, for everyone's happiness. With a harmonious ideology at the core, India believes in winning the hearts and admiration of the whole world. Since its independence struggle, India has shown the world that non-violence and all-inclusiveness along with spiritualism, yoga, Bollywood films, classical dances and the ever-popular lip-smacking cuisines are Indian inherent strength. And attract the world to this wonderful, hospitable country and its warm people. A nation that prides itself on its heritage. India is a shining example of how unity, harmony and oneness combined with culture can conquer the whole world. Proud of its past, India is moving forward into the future. In a rapidly changing technological landscape, India has emerged as a technological giant. With its booming information technology, diaspora spread all around the globe. India dominated the world in intellectual prowess. From tech titans to humble startup ventures, India is making her presence felt all over the global IT scene. Looking at a future that is highly progressive and all-inclusive, India draws strength from its ancient civilization and rich history. Learning several lessons in morality and humility, India believes in leading by example. A land where modern technology and progress work alongside with old traditions and culture. India is a land of wonders indeed, where the past seamlessly exists with the present and becomes a part of the future. Today, hand in hand with its ancient civilization and modern values, India is a landscape of diversity, tolerance and inclusiveness. Using its public goods such as yoga and Ayurveda, India has spawned some of the world's greatest religions, art and literature. Being the biggest and most vibrant democracy in the world, it is a melting pot of culture and traditions that promotes the subliminal message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Ainijah paroveti ganana laghu chetasam udar charitana tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is mine, that is theirs. Only narrow-minded believe in this divide. Wise, however, believe for the whole world as one family.
Washes away many memories, but the life of Bal Gangadhar Tilak remains with us, nourishing the mind and heart of free India. The crowded years of his life are part of our history. Let us recall those tempestuous days and join the Lokmanya where he lived, worked and fought. The boy from Ratnagiri in the Konkan, born in a lower middle-class family, inherited many fine qualities from his learned father, Gangadhar Shastri. Leaving his birthplace, Tilak made his way to Pune, a city with many historic associations. In 1872, he joined the Deccan College. This was to be his home during the most formative years of his life. Soon, his restless mind was absorbed in the study of a wide variety of subjects. Kerunana Chhatre, who taught mathematics, encouraged Tilak's interest in analytical geometry and astronomy. The young student was no bookworm. He exercised his frail body, determined to conquer physical weakness. Here too, with Gopal Ganesh Agarkar, Tilak discussed the problems of the day, became aware of the plight of his people. Many hours the two friends spent together near the Deccan College. Even today, one feels their shadowy presence.
मला तर असं वाटतं की ही जुनाट पुढं तोडून तोडून म्हणजे जी भांडणं होतील त्यातच दमछाट व्हायची. बेहतर काय बघ इंग्रज त्याचीच वाट पाहतो. आम्ही आपला भांडावं आणि त्याला रान मोकळं मिळावं. पण नैतिक पाया भक्कम झाल्या वाचून समाजाची एक संस्थळी निर्माण होणार कशी? मग काय तिथवर थांबायचं? नाही गोपाळ, आलं तेवढं 50 वर्षाचं रक्तशोषण पुष्कळ झालं. देशासाठी काहीतरी आपण केलं पाहिजे आणि झाडून केलं पाहिजे.
The years passed. Tilak graduated, and at the age of 23, he became a lawyer. A brilliant legal career awaited him, but he decided to devote himself to the education of his people. He started a school to instill a patriotic spirit among the youth. Among those who joined him were his old friend Agarkar, Vishnu Shastri Chiplunkar, and Nam Joshi. Then the Deccan Education Society was founded and the Ferguson College came into being. But before long, Tilak had resigned from the society, fearing that British patronage would destroy the independent spirit of the institutions. Soon after, he turned to his newspapers, the Kesari and the Maratha. Among the many pens that have fought tyranny, Tilak's is famed. The words he wrote roused his people from the apathy of centuries. When he could find the time, his thoughts always turned to research. His interest in astronomy he combined with his study of Sanskrit texts. The result was Orion, an attempt to establish that the Vedas were at least 6,000 years old. The great Makshmula, a scholar of international repute, paid tribute to Tilak's scholarship. Meanwhile, Kesari had given the call for the mass celebration of festivals to glorify Ganpati, the god of learning, and Shivaji, the symbol of India's will to be free. These festivals became a powerful lever for political awakening. Then came the terrible famine of 1896. Tilak began organizing relief measures to bring food to a starving peasantry. A year later, the bubonic plague struck. Once again, Kesari led the battle for survival. Pune had become a city of the dead and the dying. The epidemic had spread rapidly. A mass exodus was on. To check the contagious disease, the British authorities gave unlimited power to an officer named Rand, whose high-handedness and rough methods caused untold suffering. Tilak, fearless, indomitable, stayed on in Pune and went to the aid of a haunted people. He organized a hospital and called upon government to treat the victims of the plague with sympathy. The epidemic raged. So did the oppression of a merciless bureaucracy which refused to enlist the cooperation of the public. A city's wrath had now been kindled. On June 22nd, returning from Government House, Rand, the tyrant of Pune, was a marked man. Revenge had been taken. But before dawn, the hunt for the assassin had begun in the city. From his headquarters, Tilak thundered against the power was being challenged by a man who had become the spokesman of a whole people. His voice must therefore be silenced. The trial took place in the Bombay High Court. The great patriot was sentenced for sedition. The scene shifts to Dongri jail. The date, September 14th, 1897. On this day, Tilak, the scholar and patriot, began an 18 months rigorous imprisonment, registered as a common criminal. No indignity, no suffering could break Tilak's spirit. Years ago, he had vowed to sacrifice himself on the altar of his country's freedom. And now, as he wasted away on a diet of bread and water, his health was grievously damaged. At last, the British authorities, fearing that he would die, decided to order his release before the expiry of his sentence. To recoup his health, Tilak, together with his family, retired to Sinhagad, Shivaji's historic fort in the Western Ghats. Life was quiet here. The mountain air restored his lost strength. The sunset reminded him of the midnight sun, of the long days and nights of the Arctic region. He was back to his research. With Orion, he had probed the origin of the ancient Vedas. His studies now convinced him that the Aryans came from the Arctic. For those days, his thesis, The Arctic Home in the Vedas, was a remarkable piece of research. Then, in July 1899, Tilak returned to lead the battle for freedom. Punascha Hari Om, we start again. Momentous years followed. The British mobilized to shatter India's unity. The policy of divide and rule was launched. The partition of Bengal was decreed. The entire country was ablaze with discontent. The leaders of the nation prepared for action. Tilak, the ablest and most trusted of them all, now issued his memorable challenge. "We are not armed," he said, "but we have a political weapon. This is boycott. Boycott this foreign government." Can you do that by your united efforts? If you can, you are free from tomorrow. The response to Tilak's fiery words was immediate. The memorable Paisa Fund helped finance new Swadeshi industries. These struck at the roots of foreign exploitation. Kesari called for nationwide boycotts, for a patriotic spirit in every field of activity, and for a new education. Tilak also led the campaign against social evils. Dadabhai Naoroji was president of the Indian National Congress in 1906, a session which approved Tilak's new program. A year later, however, at the Surat session, a serious split developed within the Congress over the new policy. Tilak fought on. Disunity encouraged the rulers to order countrywide repression. Muzaffarpur in Bengal replied with bombs. Many struggles and sacrifices faced India's millions. The British moved to silence Tilak, the father of Indian unrest. Bombay's High Court was the scene of Tilak's historic trial in 1908. The judge enters the courtroom. The drama has begun. Tilak is in the prisoner's cage. The Advocate General, with great vehemence, describes the crimes of the accused. It is an unequal battle against the organized might of an empire. Tilak does not flinch. He prepares his own defense, speaks for a whole nation. A closely guarded jury begins to deliberate on whether Tilak is guilty. Within an hour and a quarter, the jury emerges. There is silence. Soon the verdict is pronounced. He is guilty. The judge asks the accused if he has anything to say. The atmosphere is electric. Then Tilak's voice is heard, strong and clear. All I wish to say is that in spite of the verdict of the jury, I maintain that I am innocent. There are higher powers that rule the destiny of things, and it may be the will of Providence that the cause which I represent is to prosper more by my suffering than by my remaining free. The people protested. Giant strikes by workers took place for the first time. Tilak began his sentence. He was to be banished from his land and people, transported to the notorious central jail of Mandalay in far-off Burma. Six years of solitary confinement begin. In summer, Mandalay was a veritable furnace. There was no protection from heat or dust. Even the birds perished. Tilak would mother them and also find the precious water to save the withering plants in the jail compound. A letter, heavily censored, would arrive from home once every 3 months. In these impossible conditions, Tilak resolved to continue his research, particularly in mathematics and astronomy. Back in Pune, tragedy engulfed Tilak's family. His wife Satyabhamabai passed away in 1912. The death came as a cruel blow to Tilak. One chapter of my life is closed, he wrote, and I am afraid it won't be long before another will be. During the Lokmanya's absence, political activity in India stagnated. The National Congress was losing its hold over the people. Even its pandals were empty. In Mandalay, Tilak searched for a message that would give new heart to his countrymen. He turned to the Gita for guidance. On the eve of the epic battle of the Mahabharat, Arjun too was confused and demoralized. Did not Lord Krishna tell him, "Follow me and fight"? So must India act, selflessly. This was Tilak's Gita Rahasya. In India, celebrations announced the coronation of a new King Emperor, George V. Prisoners in hundreds were pardoned and set free. India's heroic son was not released. But in due course, the sentence ran out and Tilak returned. The whole country was filled with joy. In 1914, the world was at war and India turned to... Here in Gaikwadwada, representatives of all sections would come to discuss future plans. In 1916, at the Lucknow session, Tilak re-entered the Congress, united opposing sections, welded national unity. Very soon, his immortal words, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it," had become the battle cry of the freedom movement. 1918, Tilak sailed to England to conduct a libel suit. In India, new repression was launched, and Mahatma Gandhi took command of the struggle. The Punjab, which had supplied fighting men to the Allies, felt the brunt of the terror. In April 1919, Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar was the scene of a ghastly slaughter.